Hi, everybody. I'm Trisha Howe. I'm here with you from Long and McQuaid, and joining me today to present on deep listening and found percussion is Gareth Bane, who is a teacher and saxophone player here in Calgary. And I would invite you to read his whole bio on our reading clinic page, readingclinic.ca. I'm going to turn it over to Gareth so he can tell you some really great ideas for coping in and out of the pandemic.
Hey everybody. So like all of you, I got put into a rather interesting situation last year where my administration came to me and said, well, here's the thing. Basically, you're now a humanities teacher. However, we would like you to teach one music class to a grade 7 class, which will rotate throughout the year. This ended up being roughly 8 weeks. It got stretched and shrunk in a few places, but we won't get into that now. So I ended up having to come up. Oh, sorry. And so they said to me, so we need you to teach this class. The kids have to stay in their class. They can't leave the class. You can't bring instruments to them unless you're going to wipe everything down and clean everything up afterwards. You can't share anything. We don't have enough technology for you to have any computers or access to anything. Teach curriculum. It put me in an interesting position where I was like, okay, so what is music? And what is important that kids are supposed to be getting out of music? I say this all the time in junior high. Obviously, my job is not to train students to become professional musicians. My goal is I want kids to A, love music, and B, come out of band with all of the skills that make great musicians great, that they can then apply it up to. So I kind of came up with this little curriculum. This version that I'm going to show you was the 8-week version. I have longer versions. I have versions that I had to take online and teach vast parts of this from remotely. So if anyone finds this interesting and wants to contact me, wants me to go through any of this and any level, I obviously can and would love to. As Trisha knows, I do love to talk, which is one of the reasons why she asked me to do this. So basically what I did is I started with a video. One of the things I'll share with everybody, I'll just share my Google Drive that has all this stuff in it. In there, there's a scope and sequence that outlines all of these things. So when I talk about links and stuff, this will all be shared afterward. But I start with it's not a TED Talk. It's a TED Ed little short 5-minute video that Victor Wooten, who, if you don't know, is a phenomenal bass player based out of Nashville. And he talks about this concept of music as a language. And so I started there. And it's a little 5-minute video, and it's him playing Amazing Grace by himself while the camera's spinning around him. And in the background, you can hear him talking, where he basically explains this concept of music as a language. The idea being that really, how do we learn music? It's the same way we learn how to communicate with other people. We start as babies, we listen to our parents talking around us. We internalize the sounds that they're making, we internalize their meaning, and then we start to emulate that back. And if you approach, I've always found in band, if you approach music this way, it's far more effective. I usually don't introduce any kind of notation or anything like that to my students until well deep into grade 7. I teach them all to play by ear first. And then I find after they learn how to read, the nice thing is they can all play in tune and they'll have good tone and like all of these things that we struggle with because they're so busy staring at the page. Because really, the worst way to learn a language is to learn how to read it and then try to, while you're understanding what you're seeing, spit it out of your face. So I start off with that concept. Music is a language. And we usually spend class, again, video is 5 minutes, and we spend the rest of the class talking about what is language, how do you learn like that. Next class is I take them outside, get them to all be quiet. Once they're quiet, give them about 5 to 10 seconds and then say, what do you hear? Right? Now, as soon as you get that quiet, as we all know, all of a sudden you start hearing things like the wind in the trees and the birds and car drives by and there's someone talking on their cell phone like a block over there and whatever. So there's all these sounds that start to jump out of you when you actually start to listen. So they start to get this idea of like, okay, so how do I listen to things? Then we start talking about sound, right? What does a bird chirping sound like? A magpie does not sound like woodpecker, right? And you can start, and you don't have to have this deep understanding of these two sounds, but think to yourself, what do they sound like? Are they more rhythmic? Are they higher in pitch? Are they lower in pitch? Maybe why, if you want to go down. That's a deeper rabbit hole you can go down if you do know about birds and calls and things like that, because the way different birds call actually has to do with their environment, because different bird calls travel differently because of the sounds that they make, right? So you can impart that if you want to. We talk about cars, right? Cars going to drive by. Hey, what's a car sound like? First kid puts their hand up, will absolutely say to you, the car sounds like a car. Make fun of them, then move on. A car doesn't sound like a car. What does a car sound like? Well, a car sounds like an engine. What's an engine sound like? Well, it sounds like a pitch that comes up and then changes gears. And so the pitch comes up again, changes gears, pitch comes up again. As it's coming up, it comes up quickly in a lower gear, and then it comes up at a more gradual rate as the gears go up, right? So that's what a car engine sounds like. Not the noisiest part of a car. The noisiest part of a car are the tires. If you want to hang out and really go on a deep dive on this one, you can tell whether cars have got winter tires on or summer tires on. Some different sounds, which is one of the reasons why we get winter and summer tires, right? One has a much more smooth, quieter sound. One's got that knobby, kind of bumpy sound. Easiest way to do this, you see a car go by, you see a truck go by. Trucks almost always have knobbier tires on. So, deep dive, right? Talk about that, come back in. Trisha can pull this up if she wants. Whenever I talk about one of these concepts, I always end it with an exit slip. I do this specifically, not because half the time I don't even mark them, but I just want to make sure that when kids are doing something, actually that's a different one, Trisha. I need the one that says music quiet. It's your fourth.
There we go. Yep.
Right? It's just simple questions, okay? What's musician quiet? What did you hear? How does this change your perspective? Makes them think. Also makes them learn really quick. If they don't pay attention in my class, they're not going to do very well in their exit slips. So usually for the first couple of them, I do throw a little mark on them. I do throw it in Power School so they are aware they're getting graded and their parents can see it. As you can see with those, I have 2 to a page, so you can just print them out, cut them in half, and I always put extra lines on the back so that if they want to, you get your kids that want to write one sentence, fine. You get your kids that want to write you like, a dissertation, that's fine too. They've got space in the back. And I've also noticed the cool thing about the lines on the back is that you get some kids that don't want to write in a box. They want to write on the line. So they just draw an arrow and then they just write like that. So that's that. Next class. So we'll in my laptop and I bring speakers. Even better if it's the kind where they can see the cone, like the bass cone inside the speaker. Okay. I hook this up to an online tone generator. I've got the link again in the notes. You can take this thing from 0 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz. So it's the full range of human hearing. So what I do is I start at A440, right? From A440, first thing I do is I go high. Always talk to your students first before you do this. Some students get super, super uncomfortable when you do this and can have panic attacks. Okay? So as we all know, very loud, high-pitched frequencies can make you very uneasy. Tell your kids this. I have not ever had a problem, but it really helps when you tell the kids that you're going to do this, because you will see this for some of them. You can kind of give them one of these, and they'll be like this, but some of them are not into it. Also, watch out for hearing aids if you're playing this game. So you can take this thing all the way up. Now, as we know as adults, we lose our hearing at certain frequencies. So once you get to that point where you can't hear anymore, ask them if they can still hear it. You can turn it on and off to double check. And usually they can still hear it. You can make the joke about how, I don't think they can let you do it anymore, but cell phones, you used to be able to, if you had like a jailbroken iPhone, you could download an app on it and change your ringtones to ultrasonic frequencies. So your phone could be going off in class, the teacher can't hear it. So you can play around with these high frequencies, play the game, see how high you can go until the last person says they can't hear it, right? They'll say they can hear it, but they can actually hear the lights buzzing, right? But you can take it up to 20,000 hertz. Another fun fact, you can pull it up. We can hear as high as 20,000 hertz. Obviously, animals can go higher. Fun fact I did not know, cats can hear in higher frequencies than dogs can. I believe dogs tap out at 40,000 hertz. Cats tap out at 60,000 hertz. When you get into the real ultrasonic ranges, I think the highest frequency, if I remember right, is dolphins, and they can hear as high as 150,000 hertz. That's kind of crazy. Also crazy, another fun one is your ears actually can perceive a wider spectrum of information than your eyes can. So they're actually much stronger sense than your eyes are, but we've evolved to become visual creatures, which is why we rely so much more on our eyes than we do on our hearing. So now you take it all the way back down to 440. Usually I try and do this quickly because then you get the wee, and the kids all go, it's super fun. When you get back to A440, you will notice that it sounds lower than it did when you first played it because your perception has now shifted, right? And the kids will all notice this. So start at A440 and then you go down. Once you get down to about, I would say, about 20 hertz, I think. 20 or 50. Let's call it 50. You can play around with this, you can find it. Once you get to around 50 hertz, you get to that point where the pitch is so low, you can hear the peaks in the waves. So this is the point where sound, like where pitch becomes rhythm. Oh yeah, remember it was supposed to be like a rhythm talk. So yeah, there's ties in here, right? So pitch and rhythm are actually the same thing. It's just that a pitch is just extremely fast rhythm. Right? I also usually I draw waves on the board. I talk about amplitude and things like that. Amplitude, frequency, right? So I'll draw this on the board so they can see it visually as well. And they can see how if it's a big wave, it's gonna be a low sound. If it's a small wave, it's gonna be a really, really high sound. We talk about bigger is lower, smaller is higher. And again, once they get that visual, you can point to the different peaks in your lower wave and show them that's what they're hearing. Once you get down to that 10 hertz wave, 10 hertz, you're gonna have to turn your speaker up the whole way to be able to hear it. But the really cool thing is you can see the cone going. So now all of a sudden you've got this extra visual where you can see the cone is actually vibrating at that frequency, right? 20 hertz meaning what, 20 times in a second, right? My speaker taps out at about 8 hertz. It's going so slow, it's not pushing enough air. I'll see if I can remember to add this in. There's a great blog post that talks about sound, which is really fun to go through with your kids later on Wake But Why. So if you want to search Wake But Why, I think it's How Sound Works. Phenomenal deep dive on how sound works with little GIFs that show waves, shows how pulse waves actually happen. It's very, very cool. But anyway, I digress. So we do that. We go through the whole thing. So that's pitch. Then we bring the pitch all the way back up to A440, which now sounds much higher than it did when it first started. Again, because their perception has shifted. So you can kind of play around with this. The kids think it's super fun. Also be warned, if you are doing this in a classroom and not in your band room, it will completely freak out everybody that's in classes on either side of it. I am a total pariah in my school. But anyway. So that is frequency. Next, then we talk about timbre. Okay, what's timbre? Timbre is how things sound, right? I'll go to my desk, crack on my desk. I'll stomp my foot, boom. What's the difference, right? Why does it sound different? Well, it sounds different because of timbre. What's timbre? Timbre happens because of the different amplitude of the overtones that happen within your core tones. I teach a whole class on overtones. If you are not familiar, I mean, obviously all of our brass players out there know everything about overtones, right? For the woodwind players, I know for me, I did not understand overtones until as a saxophonist, I started working on altissimo stuff, and then I got Rasher's book on overtones, which every saxophone player I know out there knows what I'm talking about. Went through all those exercises. If you don't know what overtones are, there's a great video. You should watch the entire series anyway. Bernstein did a series of lectures at Harvard a number of years ago. They're all on YouTube. Each one, I think there's 5 of them. Each one's 2 hours long. They're awesome. They're also very long. If you find the one, if you search, I think it's you literally search Bernstein overtones, he will demonstrate this technique that I'm about to talk about, where you take a piano, right, and you can make the piano generate all the different overtones that exist within one pitch, right? So you have your one pitch, you've got all your overtones that happen within. I'll draw this on the board, and I'll give down all the fractions, right? So if you take your fundamental pitch, chop it in half, now you got an octave. They don't need to know what an octave is, because remember, at this point, I'm dealing with grade 7s. They have very, very basic understanding of elementary music, which I'll talk about more later. So overtones, boom, 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 boom. Get into overtones. Half gives you an octave, third gives you a fifth. Draw it on the board, superimpose them. Take no more than 3 minutes to do this because then you start seeing the yawns. But it's kind of a visual cue. Then you go to your piano. It has to be an actual piano. So you play a C, something lower down. Doesn't have to be the lowest, but lower down. Play a C. Reiterate. Okay, so in this C, you're going to hear this higher C, right? So if you play the low C, and then you play the high C. And then what we do is we talk about resonance. Okay, so the way resonance works is if I make a sound, in the good old days, I would pull out my saxophone, of course, I would just play, and then we would resonate all the strings, and you can explain what resonance is. So you can talk really briefly about, hey, like the sound, it's going to make the string resonate. You can talk about how, hey, remember, you've ever been like listening to music and then the cup that you're holding onto starts to vibrate in your hand when like a certain part of the song comes on? This is resonance. So now I'm going to play this C. So what you do is you play both of the C's for them so they hear them both. You hold down the high one, okay? But you just hold it down enough so that the dampener comes off, but the hammer doesn't hit it, right? And then you hit the low C really fast, so it'll go bump, and then your high one will go, right? You'll just hear that resonance of that string because the lower frequency, the overtone in that lower frequency has resonated in that string. At this point, especially any of your students that play an instrument like piano, whatever, things like that, like, it's very cool because now you're a wizard. You can do this with all the overtones going up, right? So you've got an octave, you've got a fifth, you got your other octave, all the way up. Then, of course, do it with a C sharp instead of the C natural, show how it doesn't work, right? Because you're the teacher, you are always right. If you end up with an extra 5 minutes at the end of class, a fun way to wrap this one up talking about resonance is there's a famous bridge, again, go on YouTube. I only picked this up because I think it's all online. So sharing videos online. There's another video on YouTube. I can't remember the name of it right now. There's a famous bridge that was built over a canyon, and they didn't take into account that the wind would blow off the ocean in this very constant way, and it set off a standing wave within the bridge. And the bridge starts off and starts doing this, and there's great shots where there's like a car, it's about this big on the bridge going like this, and the whole thing falls down. You can show them that, and of course all the kids are like, ooh, and you're super cool, which you already are. What's next after that? Next class. Okay, so we get into, so we talk about timbre, and then we talk about all the different sounds and things that you can make, right? So we've talked about like how timbre happens and why. Oh, another quick note, that's how synthesizers work too. Like if you have a synthesizer, you press the switch, so now it sounds like saxophone instead of a piano. That's because some geek went in and figured out how to like tweak all the overtones and all the sounds, so now it sounds like saxophone instead of like a piano. Because it's not a natural sound, that's why it doesn't sound like actual saxophone, right? Or why an electronic piano sounds kind of like a piano, but it has to do with tweaking the overtones to make things sound like other things. So anyway, next class. I bring in a bunch of toys. Usually I'll bring in like drumsticks. I have a hone that I bring in that'll like bang on the different sides. Okay, why is this sound that sounds like sharp and hard not sound like this sound, which sounds more resonant and booming, right? We talk about not so much like why. It's like, well, it sounds like I'm hitting, a wooden thing with a wooden thing, okay? Right? But why? What does it actually sound like? If I take this and I do, I don't know, right? Versus this, okay? They sound different. How do they sound different? Well, this, I don't know, sounds more like a tap. It's more like a tink. It's the difference between a tap and a tink. Okay? So you can get them at this point in the game, especially with grade 7, they're learning about onomatopoeia. Right? So words that actually represent sounds. You can use onomatopoeia to help demonstrate this point. Usually what I'll do is I'll find ones that are really different. So last class, I took my knuckle, tapped it on the desk, whereas I took my foot and boom, kick the floor, right? So then you write tap, you write boom on your board. Okay. The nice thing about those words is now you can use this to talk about attack, sustain, and decay. Right. So if you think about tap, tap starts with a t, right? It's very, very short and abrupt sound, right? Then it has an ah, which is a hard vowel and also somewhat short sustain, right? Ah versus a p, which is again a very, very abrupt ending, but also kind of a very like it's not a hard ending, it's kind of a soft but abrupt ending. Tap, tap, right? Then you go boom. Well, so you got a boom, very, very soft attack. You have an ooh, which is a very round sounding sustain, and an which is again a very drawn out decay. Boom, tap. So you can play around with that as much as you want. You can, if you want to, have them come up with their own words. But ultimately, what you want them to do is again use your imagination. I don't have tons of toys here, unfortunately, but like bring in a couple drumsticks. Bang on the desk, bang on the desk, which is the desk leg. Bang on the board. Bang on anything that's not going to break. Right. Find all the different sounds that things make in your room. See if you can find things to contrast with each other. Like if you're going to hit a box, it's going to sound different than if you were like hitting the floor. For all the reasons we understand. But have the kids start talking about it. Why? Why does it sound that way? More importantly, like what does it sound like? Really get them thinking about this. What is this sound? Is it a long sound? Is it a short sound? Is it a high sound? Is it a low sound? Right? Get into the onomatopoeia. Like what is the attack of this sound? What's the sustain of this sound? What is the decay of this sound? Right? Get them really thinking about these concepts. Now, as you've noticed, I've now gotten into the percussion part of this class because I wasn't allowed to use wind instruments. And I didn't feel like wheeling 36 little xylophones into the room. So this is where we get into the more percussive side of things. Was I came up with this idea, which obviously I didn't come up with it, but someone said to me, I was talking about what I was doing, like, oh, that's found percussion. Like, oh, look at that. So so I use this idea of found percussion. So the next day I said, okay, so tomorrow, bring something to class that's going to be your instrument for the rest of this class. And I had everything from the Keen kids that came in. I had one kid I remember. She made she had a metal, like a what do you call it, a baking cup. Like you measure a cup of flour, right? Made out of metal. She filled it up with corn and then put tinfoil over top and taped the tinfoil and everything from that to kids that would, of course, not bring anything and be like, I brought my pencil. Okay. So I had like this whole range of things that kids would bring in. And I'd make them go through one by one by one by one, say, okay, what does it sound like? What sounds can you get out of it? Right? And usually, like the first kid's gonna take their pencil, they're gonna tap their desk. Great. What else can it do? Hopefully your kid's resourceful. Right? Great. What else can it do? Right? You can play around with this, and you would be terrified at how many sounds you can get out of a pencil. It's a little hard to see, but you can take them, hold them against the desk, bend it back, and whack like that. Different parts of the pencil that you tap on things. You can tap on the legs of your desk. You can tap on the top of your desk. With two pencils, you can tap them together. Lots of things that you can do. I had people with books. I had people bring a couple books and end up with like a book drum set on their desk. They figured out the different types of books sound different as you hit them. They also, funnily enough, sound different if you hit them like that versus that. Right? So open hand, your knuckles, you want to hit them like this, you want to hit them like that. Yeah, so many different things you can do. You go through every sync kit and you make them come up with all the different sounds their instruments can make. I had kids this last class. They brought in their skateboards, so they were like, spinning their wheels. That's a fun one too, right? That's a very sustained note. spin a wheel, and then depending on their bearings, like the wheels would sound different, and be like banging on their board, and whacking their board on the desk, and like all kinds of things. You can just there's no rules. One thing to really think about with this is like what they talk about at university these days with what's it called? Discovery learning. It's very discovery learning. Let them do their own thing, right? But have them do it intentionally. Make sure that they're talking about their sound. What do these things sound like? Why do they sound that way? Right? Go on a deep dive. This is another one I often will mark, because at this point we've used a lot of words, we've done a lot of talking, and it's like, like what did you bring? What does it sound like? And also helps makes the kids accountable. Usually by the next day, I've got more kids coming in, with more than just a pencil, and they'll start to engage a little bit more. So, next trick. For the following week or so, I go back outside. I went outside a lot because you're supposed to go outside. You don't have to go outside, but it's for COVID reasons. If I was putting them in groups, it was a lot easier to do it outside. So we go outside. I put them in groups, right? I put them in their I put them. One's over there, two's over there, three's over there, and then basically the instruction is this: you have to compose something, right? You, 4 or 5 of you. You have to all play your instruments together, and you have to come up with a performance. Okay? You have to talk to each other first, figure out, like, one person have a pencil they're clicking, there's another person have a book that they're slapping together. Like, what are the sounds that we're dealing with here? Talk to each other about it, figure out how you're going to put those things together. Some sort of soundscape, some sort of composition. 5 minutes. They immediately will freak out. That's okay. You give them 5 minutes, they don't have time to screw around, you will still have groups to screw. But most of your groups will like get on it straight away. Oh, because they also have to perform for the class. Okay? So they all go, they do their thing, you walk around, just making sure they're on task. After 5 minutes goes by, you come back, and you have each group form for class. At which point you say, okay, what did you think about it? Well, most groups will say, we didn't have enough time. Totally fine. Then you talk to the class. Say, what did you think about it? Start introducing this idea of constructive feedback. Okay? What did you hear? It has to be a what, it has to be a why. And extra points if it's, I don't like it because this is what I would do different. Now they're offering suggestions. Again, they have to listen, they have to like internalize, they have to come up with an opinion. I also really like to stress this idea that there's no good or bad music. There's music we like, there's music we don't like. And it's important to think about why. Now, you're going to have students come back and say, I just like music that I like. I don't know why. Totally. Me too. That's not what this class is about. This class is about deconstructing why. Why? Why do you like music? Why do you not like music? I have a whole backup, another project that this is not a part of the 8-week course. That's also not really percussion based. I can talk about later. See how our time goes. Where was I at? Oh, the other thing I bring up at this point is the 3 roles of a musician, which is listener, composer, and performer. So Pauline Oliveros, who wrote this really cool tune called Tuning Meditation, which I won't go into now, talked about this concept that we experience music differently depending on whether we're just listening to it, whether we composed it, or whether we are performing it, right? And I know that everybody out there understands this. Like, we all have a completely different opinion about music that we have personally performed or we have written. Right? How many times have you performed a piece of music and then you're playing it for someone going, like, this is the cold bar coming up. Listen, there's the bass clarinet here. It's so good. Okay, right? Your perception of this is completely different from theirs because they weren't there. They didn't work on a piece. They don't get it, right? So then this one actually you could pull up. This is the listening project. So this is their first sort of project that's not really a just an exit slip. It's a little bit more involved. So it is reflection. So there's two videos that I show them. First one is by OK Go, a song called Needing and Getting. It's a very, very cool music video. I usually play it to them first, where they just listen to it, and then I play them the actual video. Again, I will post all of these links to these things. This video is amazing. It's basically this band. They're sitting in a car. They're driving through an obstacle course where like things are popping off the car and banging into things as they're driving past them. And it's basically everything we've talked about in class so far up to this point, done on a professional level. It's pretty epic. The second video, if Trisha could just scroll down to the next page. I should point out these questions are the same for both of these, which is how many instruments or sounds are used in this performance? List and describe. How did you feel about this performance and why? So again, you have to get deeper into this sort of listening side. So Stomp, Brooms, I'm sure all of you have heard of and or seen. If you have not, Stomp was, I want to say it was an off-Broadway show. Tours around a fair bit now. It's basically based on a bunch of people running around on the stage, picking up everyday items and turning them into rhythmic montages. It's a great way to show them how many sounds and what you can do if you want to get more complex about this, right? So they've gone through their experimental phase, they've played around, and now they can see two professional groups do it. The cool thing too is in the first video, there's numerous things that are used to make sounds, whereas in the second video, the only thing they have are brooms. Right? How many sounds can you get out of a broom? Now, fun part about this is when you push them, if you get those kids that are actually paying attention, they also use their feet, right? So they're using the brooms, they're using their feet. Occasionally, they also use their voices. They don't sing, they don't say anything, but they enunciate. So they're very, very good contrasting videos. And again, this one definitely I mark. There was a little listening rubric on the bottom, which is very simple. My districts, how they do their reporting. So basically, we have on their report card for music, they have three outcomes. First one basically is performing, second one basically is listening, and third basically is elements of music. So this one is the listening one, right? So again, it shows an in-depth and insightful understanding of elements of music versus thoughtful versus basic versus enable. So most of them are fairly able. So after that, if I do that, I'll show that on a Monday. And then the rest of the week, I talk theory. Now, one thing I always like to preface when I talk about theory, one of my professors ages ago had a theory about theory. He always called theory a filing cabinet. Okay, you do not need to know theory to play music. You don't have to have any understanding as to why a G7 augmented triad. I say G7 augmented triad. That's not a thing. A G augmented 7, right? You do not need to know why it sounds like the way it does or how it functions. It's useful to know those things. You do not need to know those things. You can hear those things and be able to contrast those things with other things that you've heard to make interesting sounds, right? You can listen to other people playing rhythms and things like that and implement those or put those rhythms into your composition. You absolutely do not need to know what a triplet is to be able to play one. So there is a filing cabinet. If you are interested in what a triplet is, you just have to look under T. And once you find out what a triplet is, then you can find out how a triplet is used. Because hey, if I put two triplets together, now it sounds like I'm playing in 6/8. If I put four together, it sounds like I'm playing in 12/8. Hey, now this sounds like I'm playing a shuffle. Interesting, right? So that's all theory is. I always preface it with that. This is the written down stuff. It's useful if you want to use it. It's useful if you want to gain deeper understanding and complexity. So, class 1, refresher. Whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes. Draw bars on the board. I talk about time. I talk about pitch being vertical, time being horizontal. I draw an arrow on the board. Here's time. So that I can measure time, I'm going to write these little cross lines in here. Oh, you know what? Because I'm measuring time, I'm going to follow those measures, right? I take about a minute to talk about time signatures. Won't give you all my spiel on time signatures now. Hey, we're going to call this common time, even though it's really only common in North America. Started, and all our drummers up there. And we're going to have 4 beats in the bar. Now, take these quarter notes, whole notes, blah, 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 fit them in these bars. Awesome. I pick one kid, fill that bar up. Pick another kid, fill that bar up. With random 4 bars of rhythm. Awesome. Let's clap it. Now, this is the part where I find out very quickly which of my feeder schools have strong elementary music programs and which less so. So you have to kind of gauge it at this point. Some of my classes, I could push it to 16th notes. Some of my classes, I could push it to 16th notes with 16th rests. Those were fun. Other classes, quarter notes was, and 8th notes was okay as long as it wasn't like there were no 8th rests or anything like that. So gauge a class, go through this single line. Next class, make them do the same thing, but now superimpose one line above another line. So now you have half class clapping one line, half class clapping another line. See if you can get them to 4 parts. Talk about how, hey, look, there's a half note here, so maybe down here we should have some 8th notes because then we can contrast between parts, right? How can we make this more interesting? How can we make it more complex? How can we make it more interesting? Keep asking them these questions. Force them to write it themselves. Don't write it for them. Make them do the composition themselves. Make it too hard, adjust it so that they can do it. Then have them pull out their instruments and play with their instruments. Then you can play around with, hey, look, you guys have more sustaining ringing instruments. And you guys have more abrupt percussive instruments. So maybe you guys should play that line. You guys should play this line. And hey, maybe we should do something else and we'll change this line because it works better with your instrumentation, right? Start getting into these concepts with them. Start playing around with it. 3rd class. I try not to do more than 3 classes on theory. You will absolutely lose them like that. Up to this point, they've had lots of hands-on, lots of weird, neat concepts and things they've heard, never done before. I had very, very strong engagement with my classes. It was great up to this point. This is always the tricky. They do not like theory. It's hard for me because I'm a jazz player. I'm a super theory nerd. I can talk about theory all day. Not to grade 7th, apparently. So, last day, I talk about form, okay? And say, okay, so now we have our little, 2-bar but 4-line composition. Okay, sounds great, but it's too short. How do we make it longer? Right? Introduce. That was a good one. Introduce this idea of then having a new composition of say 2 to 4 bars. This is section A. This is section B. Talk about how you can repeat section A. You can repeat section B. Talk about how you could start on section A, go to section B, then come back to section A, then come back to section B, then come back to section A, and stop. Right? Play around with this idea. I usually sing them the Flintstones because you can talk about AABA form, and again this idea of like how you get. I mean, obviously I don't get into sonata form, but basic forms, ABA, AB, AABA, real basic stuff. Following week, after that, you get them back outside. This time they get to choose their own groups. Okay, it's time for their final project. So once they're in their own groups, you absolutely let them choose their own groups at this point because they now have a week. I give them a week. Parameters are, and you could pull up the final project for me if you want, Trisha. So they said they get to choose their own groups. They have to come up with a complex, multi-layered, multi-part composition that they're going to perform for class. Now, if you can look at this first page is actually for you. This is how you're going to assess their performance. Basically, what I did again for these two parts performance, it tied in well for the way we report because we have our first stem, which is about performing, and our third stem, which is about elements of music. So I based one on the composition, the other one on the performance. You can go through this rubric and basically, you assess them. And keep scrolling down. You just keep scrolling down. So this is the reflection that you print off for your students. So while the one group is performing, at the end of that week. All of everybody else is writing a reflection. Again, what did you think of their composition and why? And this ties in again to this idea of how there is a listener, there's a composer, and there's a performer, right? So while you are marking the composers on their composition and their performance, the rest of the class are listening, writing reflections on their listening. So in the end, you get marks for those three areas: listener, composer, performer. And so that's their final project, which again, they also found pretty engaging. And I am still kicking myself for not recording some of these compositions. I had a group in the first quarter when I did this. They had multiple instruments that they swapped between depending on what section they were playing, like which in the forum, which section they were playing. They had multiple sections where they played different instruments in different ways, and it was awesome. Just another note on the notation. After I show them all the notation the week before, they can use notation. I advise they use notation so that from day to day they know what they're doing, right? And they can remember, especially if your timing doesn't work out and you finish on a Thursday and now they're back on a Monday. I mean, kids aren't going to remember anything. They got to make notes. I do not care if their notes are correct. I don't look at them. I tell them this. You can make notes. I would advise it. You don't have to, but it helps because it helps you come up with these ideas of complexity and it keeps things structured, right? Because again, this is like the written form of communication. It's why it's necessary. So after that, they do finish their final compositions, and then the second to last class, I show them, I give them a final reflection, which I think, Trisha, if you want to just pull that one up. I think this is, yeah, so end of term music reflection. So basically, what is music? What does it mean to you? Have your ideas, your opinions on music changed? What skills could you take from studying music and applying this to other classes or tasks in life? Think about skills necessary to be a composer, performer, and listener, because obviously the whole point, if you think about these skills that we need to play music, I mean, they're so transferable to everything else. And we know that as band teachers, but I think having the kids articulate is really helpful. Second page, what aspect of being a musician did you enjoy the most? Both a performer or listener, and why? And then anything else you would like to share. I'm always amazed how many kids, that last one, they don't have to fill that out. But I like it when they do because it does give me some interesting feedback on whether the kids like the class, things that I can change, all that fun stuff. Now, the last class, I show them a final TED Talk. This is a TED Talk, again, with Victor Wooten. It looks at that short 5-minute video that I played at the beginning of this little quarter term 8-week thing and wraps it up in a 20-minute standard TED Talk. It's actually a TEDx. I can't remember where he did it, but it's really great. And again, he just really wraps up this concept of music as a language and like, why do we listen? How do we learn how to play? How do we become better musicians? It's a really great little video. At this point, it's the end of the term. I don't give lecture or anything on this. And then, boom. I do have a super fun, usually actually I'll do this the second to last day, and then the last day I have a hoot because, hey, we're online, and hoots, yay. Yeah, don't get me started on hoots. So, a couple extra little things. For some of you, you might be thinking, wow, it wasn't tons of assessment. Not tons, because this was the first iteration of this that I did, and it was short and sweet. I think I only actually had them for 7 weeks for this one, so it's pretty tight. So I didn't do tons of assessment because there's not a ton of assessment. One of the things that I would add in is I would give them a musicianship mark that was anecdotal, and what I would do is I would talk to them and tell them at some point, sometimes in the beginning, usually I would remind them in the middle, definitely at the end. We talk about musicianship. So what is musicianship? Musicianship is the same thing as sportsmanship. So what is sportsmanship? Kids all know what sportsmanship is, right? So it's like you got to listen to your coach, you got to show up prepared, you have to support your team, help each other out. These are all the same things about being a musician, right? You gotta listen to the teacher. You gotta make sure you're showing up prepared with your stuff ready to go. You have to support other people that you're performing with and working with. All these things, right? So I would usually give them a musicianship mark just to, you know, add some extra marks in. Because our quarters ended up not being actual quarters, I had a bunch of extra things that I threw in here. They're not really in the scope and sequence, but I'll share the whole drive. I had things I did like my exit slips. I have versions of them that are actually Google Forms because that was just way easier than like sending them a an exit slip that then they'd have to download and fill out and take a picture and re-upload. And it was easier to do as Google Form. But there were also little classes I did. There's a whole bunch of extra TED Talks, music related TED Talks in there that I would bounce out at them. I ended up creating a really cool genre project. Kudos to who hooked me up with that. That was Jeff Hiley, Calgary, hooked me up with that one. He threw together this little genre project for his kids. I took that and expanded it. Took it and turned it into this big thing. Kids had to pick two pieces of music on YouTube and compare them in a Google slide presentation. It's very effective. It was awesome. I would do that in a regular band class again without thinking about it. I had a couple, as I'm sure all of you do, like a couple one-off TED Talks that are just useful for musical-based things. A big one that I also did that was really fun is I did a comparative piece using the Dies Irae, which is an old funeral chant that is now used very commonly in a lot of movie music and a lot of movies that students will have seen. And then I also played them, podcast. And then I played them another podcast about the Amen break, which gets into this whole idea of sampling drum breaks and using them in your music. And then this turned into a whole deeper discussion around how to use other people's music in composition. When's it okay? When's it not okay? Then I had a couple podcasts I played about copyright. Same idea, like when is it okay to use music? And I did this not because I actually care about copyright, but what I wanted them to do is hear it. Right? Because the cool thing about these podcasts is it would say, here's an example of this person using this part of this person's song in their song, right? They're using enough of it that this is okay. How do we feel about this? How does this change what they're doing? Is it the same feeling of it? Very interesting. And again, really getting them listening to what's happening. And that turned into a little sort of class discussion / project that I put together. So if anyone's interested in that, again, less to do with percussion, so I can talk. If anyone wants to email me about that one, I can bust that out. Yeah. What else? Oh, and the cool thing about that one, that was why we had the. I don't know if it's going to get edited out. We actually pulled up my final project 2.0. After I did this whole deep dive on Dies Irae and listening to other people's music and being inspired by that, the final project was altered in that same as the one that I just showed you, except that they actually had to come up with 5 pieces of music that they liked. They had to then steal at least one element of one of those songs. I had some that stole stuff from all 5, but you had to do at least one. You had to integrate that into your composition in some way, and then you had to give me a rationale showing where you used it and why and how. So, as well as the performance and everything else they did. So, which was really cool way actually to wrap up, like, and tie that part in. And again, this was for like if I had more time, I had to kill. You know what I'm saying? The because sometimes I had 8 weeks and sometimes I had 13 weeks. Like I had to really kind of compress and expand and work with things. Yeah. So music is a language. That's what I did. I hope it's helpful. Like I said, I will get Trisha to share. I'll get an active link that I can share to everybody if you want to use anything in any of my stuff. I'll have it as view only, so you have to make a copy of it. That way you're not like changing and altering my stuff. And, have fun. Any questions? I'll make sure my email is accessible too. I'm always up for sharing this stuff. And if you have any comments about it and you want to give me any feedback on it, please. I'm no master of this game, but Rich and I were talking about this stuff a lot, and she thought we could share. So there you go. Hope everyone's doing well. Did I cover the bases? Trisha, any questions?
Yeah, I think that was great, and I'm so glad that we had these conversations because I think that we sometimes spend so much time thinking about notes we don't think about rests. So, like the thinking about the silence and the deeper listening and the deeper meaning behind those things, the pandemic forced us to start doing that, and I do believe that on the other side we'll build stronger musicians because of it. So I'm really glad that you were able to share that with people in that sort of broken down, easy to manage, I don't have to reinvent the wheel right now kind of way. It's a great series of classes. So I will share the Google Drive link and stuff. I'll put it down underneath the YouTube video so that it'll be there so that everybody can just watch the video and click and have the resource.